So for the past couple of years, I've had questions crop up surrounding my modelling workflow. And the people asking are trying to decide which workflow is best for themselves to use for their own work. And you watching this may be wondering the same thing, or you may be just looking on how to improve and save time with new techniques to bolster what you already do, which is awesome. But it's an interesting one, because they've seen someone like myself who talk a lot about modelling practices and different ways of doing stuff, especially on X and my Discord, and often watch my time-lapse videos or tutorials and have noticed that I've switched between various methods. Methods like the bevel workflow in Blender using hard ops, ZBrush Boolean dynameshing, and even traditional box poly modelling, and have become a little confused as to which one is best. And honestly, the question in of itself, whilst well-intentioned, is a bit of a misnomer. It's not the right question, or in fact more accurately, it's only half the question they should be asking. The answer on the face of it is really subjective, and sometimes it's subjective to your context, meaning what works for one person might not work well for another, and the usage or pipeline of the asset you're making may require a very specific modeling workflow for you to use. And so when I get asked the question which one should they ought to be using, I always respond in the subjective. It entirely depends on the needs. If I'm making something for Rust, which is usually a lot of stuff badly welded together, I know that I'm probably going to go down one particular route. And if, for example, I'm making something for a workshop like I did with Noman, with the camera gun, then it's going to go down a different route. And sometimes some assets don't even need ZBrush, for example, a ZBrush damage pass, and the process looks really different. The context behind what you're making really determines your modelling workflow. But that being said, there is one workflow that I am quite partial to, and that is a combination of traditional subdivisional modelling and Booleans. It's the Boolean Sub-D workflow. Previously, when I worked in 3ds Max, I'd box model everything and Sub-D. It was very time consuming because you had to work out all the shapes, edge by edge, vert by vert, but the results were great. Sometimes a little bit inaccurate on my part. And then when I moved over to Blender, I actually started using the bevel hard ops workflow. And whilst it was really fast, beveling shapes out and then just whacking a bevel modifier on top, there was a lot of cleanup to be done to get the mesh usable, especially if I was taking things into ZBrush for a detail pass. And I mean like a lot of cleanup. Eventually I just got a bit bored of all the cleanup, so the solution was to meet somewhere in the middle, and that is this Boolean Sub-D workflow. This is what you're watching right now, and it's actually really simple. You create meshes that approximate the overall silhouette and shape, and just Boolean, subtract shapes from or add to it. And then you just work out the support loops, just like I'm doing here. And you may be thinking, well, what's the point in setting up all your support loops when I can just take it into ZBrush and Boolean everything and smooth everything out? And some of the reasons that I personally find this method compelling is that it's way less destructive for my workflow, meaning I can go back and repurpose the mesh very easily, like quickly creating a low poly mesh for baking. Otherwise, I often find myself basically having to do retopology in TopoGun or just remodeling most of it in Blender for the low poly anyway. And not only that, but it gives me way more control over the entire mesh during the creation process. And this extends itself to having complete control over how edges and shapes transition from one to another, to fixing the mesh if any issues crop up along the way. I personally have found ZBrush to be a bit buggy when dealing with a lot of merging, subtracting, dynameshing, and having enough geometry to support the shapes, and having to make sure that everything is capped, no open holes or anything like that. Otherwise, the mesh just breaks, and often the poly counts are in the millions, whereas the Sub-D Boolean workflow, well, it's like a fraction of that. That being said, going down this route, you may find that you're having to work out how to resolve pinching, which I know frustrates a lot of people, but I enjoy it. It's like a chill puzzle to solve. You know, Booleaning in Blender is incredibly satisfying and quick. It's actually one of many reasons why I switched from 3ds Max to Blender, because of the speed at which I feel I can achieve something when modeling. I don't know, I'm not really sure what it is about Blender that makes the whole process so fun, but I genuinely feel really good at the end of a working day using this workflow. And this is what it really comes down to, like at a foundational level. How do you enjoy modeling? It's something that you need to figure out. You need to try different methods and see which one best suits you. Not only what suits you, what you enjoy, but what gets the job done. Now that last point is probably more relevant for someone on the job and they have to follow a certain way. But for a personal piece, or if you're looking to improve yourself overall and your speed, then if you find you're faster, more accurate using this same method, then great. If not, try something else and go with that. It really is subjective, and it goes back to my original point. I can't personally say that this is the way unless it's for a very specific reason, that the end result justifies the means. I never thought I'd be saying that, but in this instance, I am. So cutting out shapes and figuring out topology afterwards is super fun for me, and I implore you to try it out along with the other methods I've briefly mentioned here, and just sort of figure it out, what works for you. Because each method and workflow is actually really good for you to understand as a 3D modeler. If you want to be a good and experienced 3D artist, part of that is to have knowledge of multiple workflows and approaches, and to have the understanding of when to employ one over the other. And that way you can employ each method and approach something and just to smash it out because you know how it ought to be done and you can get it done. And if you take anything away from this random video, it's that I want you, instead of adhering mindlessly to one particular workflow, is to build up your weaponry, your arsenal, your skill set. Be someone who can be approached by your senior, your lead, and for them to have confidence that you can create this particular asset in a way that is both awesome and efficient for you and for your team. And also just to enjoy the process, because the last thing I want, the last thing you should want, is to be bored of modeling, the very thing that you want to do in the first place. So I hope that helps. I can't think of anything else to say in this moment, so I'll just let you enjoy the last couple of minutes of this video. As always, be sure to share your thoughts on the topic in the comments below, on X, or in my Discord, wherever you like. Peace.